Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, and welcome back to the Marion Minor Cook Athenaeum. My name is Jacob Smagula, and I'm one of your 4 Athenaeum Fellows for this year. Tonight, we turn our attention to one of the most consequential policy decisions in modern American history, the war on drugs. Since President Richard Nixon first declared a war on drugs in 1971, the United States has spent over 5 decades navigating the social, political, and human costs of this campaign. From mass incarceration and militarized policing to public health crises and persistent inequality, the legacy of this war continues to shape the lives of millions of Americans, especially those who are most vulnerable. To help us understand how this all came to be and why we're grappling with its consequences, tonight we are honored to welcome Professor David Farber, a leading historian of modern America and one of the foremost scholars of US political and social history. Professor Farber is the Roy A. Roberts Distinguished Professor of History at the University of Kansas and the author and editor of numerous works on American political culture, capitalism, and social movements. He's the author of Crack, Raw Cocaine, Street Capitalism, and the Decade of Greed, and the editor of The War on Drugs, a volume that brings together key voices examining this sweeping and controversial government initiative. In tonight's talk, Professor Farber will guide us through key moments in the history of the war on drugs, moments where political pressure and imperfect expertise collided, and where those decisions had far-reaching consequences for American society. He will explore how policymakers tried and often failed to strike a balance between the widespread demand for drugs like cannabis, cocaine, and opioids, and the dangers posed by the addiction and abuse that followed. Even as we enter an era of de-escalation of drug policy, many of these questions remain unanswered today. Tonight's program is the 2024-25 Learner Lecture on Hinge Moments in History, presented by the Gould Center for Humanistic Studies at Claremont McKenna College. As always, we ask that you please silence your cell phone and give your full attention to tonight's speaker. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor David Farber.
Well, I've been here for a couple of days, and I've been so impressed by everything, the physical plant, the students, the faculty I've met here, and now Jacob just does that. Would it be okay if he just gave the talk? Would anyone mind that? That was wonderful, a great introduction, one of the best I've had, and in English I could understand it. That was really something. So yeah, that's a good précis of what I'm going to try to do today, and I'm going to do it in front of all of you and hopefully leave plenty of time for questions. This is a question, the use of intoxicants, that has haunted not just the United States, but societies around the world, and over many, many centuries as well. So the United States doesn't come to this problem alone, but we come at it with our usual exceptionalism, harder and some ways worse than probably any other society. It's a difficult problem to solve, and there are no silver bullets for it. So as a historian, my job is not here to try to give you my policy predilections and figure out the problem, but in some ways just set it up and explain it and explore it with you all. Try to offer some analysis of what we're trying to do. So as Jacob so eloquently put it, one of the things I'm going to try to think about out loud with you all is the question of whose voices matter when we try to think through what it is that we're trying to do when we aim to resolve the social needs Americans seem to have to get high and to get intoxicated. Because the problem we're really facing is a demand problem. People all over the place, and in the United States too, seem to have a desire to become intoxicated. How do we channel it? How do we regulate it? How do we punish it if that's what we choose to do? So that's the thing I'm going to try to think about with you for the next 40 or so minutes. Now, I'm a historian, so you know what we do. We have to go backwards in order to go forward. So this is one of those first hinge moments that I'm pointing at right here. The United States has been wrestling with intoxication for a long time, but a good case could be made that during the Nixon administration, the first Nixon administration in 1971, the issue of drug abuse, not just use, but abuse, sort of came to the fore. And Richard Nixon, not usually everyone's favorite president, not usually ranked number one, is a surprisingly pragmatic policymaker when it comes to issues he doesn't care about. Richard Nixon probably was the best president Native Americans have had because he didn't care. He didn't care much about drug issues either, except as they represented a political problem. He wanted to solve the problem. But he was pretty pragmatic about it. And one of the issues we're going to think about here as we march through time is this question of whose voices matter and whose voices powerful policymakers listen to when they're trying to create solutions, answers, or straight up just punishment for those they deem drug abusers. So this is a famous moment. It's in 1971, right around the time Nixon's going to give his talk. The little pull-out quote at the bottom is what's usually used to explain the origin of the war on drugs. He doesn't quite use the phrase, but close enough. When Nixon was worrying about drug abuse in the United States and in Vietnam, he turned to this fella, Jerome Jaffe, a well-known public health specialist on problems of addiction. And guess what? He actually listened to this learned, experienced, I'd even go so far as wise man, at least for a while. So that's what I want us to think about right away. There are three problems that sort of launched this war on drugs. This turned to a much more focused concern by policymakers in Washington, D.C., and in capitals pretty much in every state in the United States. And they were three real problems that policymakers had to wrestle with. They're right here. There was a heroin epidemic, not the best use of the term, but close enough, certainly how they thought of it at the time, that was taking place domestically, mainly not around here, on the Far East Coast, New York City, Philadelphia, a few other cities along the eastern seaboard. It was real. It was a problem. Addiction had soared to levels not seen for several decades. Secondly, the problem of heroin in Vietnam. American soldiers, for solace, for relief, for recreation, were turning to the extraordinarily cheap heroin that was readily available in Vietnam at that time. It was being processed, in the Golden Triangle, not far away. And then thirdly, the one we're all kind of vaguely familiar with, even those of you who are 18 or 20, I hope, was that sometime in the 1960s, folks like you students, middle class, upper middle class, at that point predominantly white kids, were suddenly using illegal drugs, particularly the one that we now think of as maybe not so bad, which was marijuana, as it was called at that time, but also hallucinogenics, most famously LSD. Again, this is real. The usage rates were going up dramatically during this time. Okay, just quick, I'm a historian. I'm even going further backward. I got to go really fast. This problem of intoxication has haunted the American people. I mean, nowadays, I think the contest for who's the drunkest nation would be pretty ferocious, but no doubt the U.S. was winning in the early 19th century. I mean, the alcohol use was extraordinary. My favorite story is, do you all know what happened after George Washington left the presidency? Right, nowadays you write a book for like $3-4 million. They didn't have that business yet. He went home to Mount Vernon in Virginia, and he started the largest whiskey distillery in the United States. He felt funny about it. He was aware that Americans had an alcohol problem, but it was the easiest way to make good money, and he needed it. And, you won't be surprised who was actually literally distilling the whiskey. Enslaved people. So the profit margins were awesome. Again, just baseline, don't forget that in the United States for roughly 100-odd years, you could buy anything you wanted in the way of intoxicating substances. The Bayer pharmaceutical company, German company, comes up with this brilliant product called heroin. I don't know that too many of you have used it in this room. It is really efficacious at stopping pain. It was sold to stop pain. You could go to the pharmacy on the corner, and you could just buy it off the shelf, like their other best product, Bare aspirin. They had Bare heroin, really bad pain. Bare aspirin, same shelf, essentially. Cocaine, everywhere, ubiquitous. I put the funny thing up here that you see this slide. Anybody who gives a talk about drugs is going to have to use that slide. Cocaine, toothpaste. Little Jimmy's got some teething problems. This'll help. Okay, but it's worth reckoning. This was not perceived as a problem, right? That's all I'm saying. It's not objectively a problem. It's a social decision to make it a problem. Hey, I think it was good. This was a really bad idea. And as you see in the little clip I put up there, like, opioid addiction was endemic in the United States. And everybody knows who the addicts were. They were usually women of a certain age, middle class or higher, women of a certain age, often suffering from female problems, who were given some kind of opioid to try to ease their pain. So addiction was widespread. It's slightly worse today, though, for the record, than it was at this period of time. All right, quick and dirty, that was it. So again, quick and dirty slide. Oh my God, nobody can even read this. There's a million things that start to happen, but in the 20th century, essentially, which is a coalition of people for different reasons starts to think there's a need to end the open market on what's called hard drugs that had occurred in the United States. Some of this is pointed at minority groups. Some of it's pointed at the sadness of mom and grandma being addicted to an opioid. It's a coalition movement. And it's overwhelmingly non-carceral in its orientation. It's regulatory. The Treasury Department handles much of this new ways of trying to oversee what is now perceived as a public health problem in the United States. But as you kind of glance quickly at this, you'll start to see there's a turn, especially after World War II, toward creating a more punitive approach. Almost no one is going to prison for drug use during this time. There are some, I don't want to make it an absolute, but the numbers are relatively tiny, not small, tiny. Federal criminals are minuscule. And some states are a little more tougher than others. California is actually a little tougher than most. Texas, shocking, was tougher than most. It's not seen as a major problem in the United States. This does start to change with those three hinge moments I talked about. All right, so that's sort of like preps us. And you can see as these different laws, and again, I don't want to, bury this in the weeds, but like each law kind of does different things, and each attempt is trying to, because there's no consensus on what to do with this issue that there is abuse going on with intoxicants. Like, how do you just tax it? Do you put people in prison who use it? Do you give them rehabilitory help if they need it? All of the above is sort of what's happening. But again, tiny amounts of money, tiny amounts of law enforcement efforts are put into these things. So here we are, right? Oh my God, bad things are really happening. New York City starts to have a heroin epidemic starting probably the mid-1960s, and it's only getting worse by 1971. This is real. I'm an old man. I could go to New York City when I just got out of high school in the mid-70s, and this was still around. Times Square was like super squalid. There was a drug problem. Okay, what do you do with these kind of characters? Heroin. So you go from kind of disreputable types, those three gentlemen were foregrounded in that previous image. These are people like, there's not tremendous sympathy for those sad sacks. But our boys in Vietnam, these are good boys. These are guys who went and served. How do we treat them? And that's really the one that starts to play with people like Richard Nixon's sensibilities. I can't, what do I do with these guys? It's not clear to me. Oh, that's my favorite quote, though. Does anybody know who that guy is? The guy who's quoted up there? he's one of the plumbers, one of the guys who goes to prison for the Watergate scandals. He's like Nixon's fix-it guy. Hey, this for all you young people out there. He was like super young. He was in his 20s when he started working for Nixon. And he like, whatever, he's like one of those Elon Musk dudes who now goes around and chops everything up. He was like, whatever, hey, what do you need? I'll do it. So he's like, go to Vietnam. Go see if they're actually using heroin there. He's like, okay. He goes there, and that's a great quote. That's hilarious. Okay. It's real, though. What are you going to do with it? And then thirdly, again, this is the one that's sort of stereotypical, but real. What does it mean that young people are smoking weed? How are they going to get a good job at an accounting firm? This is very nerve-wracking. They're taking LSD and they're talking to trees. This couldn't be a good thing. You know, trees don't talk back. This is not good. So, right, these are like real things. Mom and dad are flipping out. Jimmy was such a bright young boy. And you can see, you know, it's lesser than you might think. By the way, this school would be an awesome example. I bet in 1965 there was that one weird guy who smoked marijuana. Like that one guy in all the Claremont schools. So it wasn't ubiquitous yet, right? It sort of really doesn't take off to the cusp of the 60s and 70s. And here it probably still never did. But it got more and more prevalent. And again, these are not like those three reprobates I showed at the front with the heroin addiction. These are like upper middle class kids. What's that mean? What do you do with that? So Nixon's first concern was not with stoned youth. He just kind of bracketed. He didn't know what to do with it. His people didn't know what to do. They knew maybe there's some politics in there, but they didn't quite know what to do. But here you see what they do. They start trying to figure out what to do. And again, it's shocking to me. I've looked at the papers, and there's Richard Nixon like getting these super boring public health reports. And here's what's weird about Richard Nixon. Imagine Donald Trump doing this. He like reads them. Writes little things, underlines. Good. Huh? Like he was like a machine. And he's like, this guy Jeffy, let's try it. And so for the first time, the federal government, this federal story at this point, they listen to public health and they start throwing some money at addiction treatment, rehabilitation. Now, it wasn't perfect. This is imperfect knowledge, I think, as was mentioned earlier, but that's who he's listening to, at least for a little bit. I got that pull-out quote, spend more in 2 years than the preceding 50. By the way, that's still not real money. We haven't touched the B word yet. This is still in the M's, millions that are being spent. But it's not spent being locking people up. It's listening to Dr. Jaffe, preeminent addiction specialist, who tells them what to do. Some of you must know the story of Vietnam. I sort of hinted at it already, which is, it turns out it's more like 5%, maybe even a little less than that, of guys in the U.S. Army, and I just stress just the Army, the biggest part of the military, who do have serious heroin problems by 1971. So that's real numbers. And Jaffe, again, like he's such a creative guy. I love this guy. He's like, well, what we'll do is we'll make them piss in a bottle. We know how to test for heroin. And if they're positive, they don't get to go home. They got to wait. They got to wait till there's no piss in there, no heroin in their piss. And here's one of these weird things that doesn't work as well today because fentanyl is way different than the kind of heroin which was weaker heroin there. It turns out that almost all these guys who were using heroin regularly, when faced with the perspective of going home or having to stay in Vietnam and getting rudimentary treatment, they're like, I don't need heroin. And they would go cold turkey. And it would work. We're still trying to make sense of that. How did so many guys stop using? It's like and some of it is the quality of the heroin, how much they were using. Not all of them were using intravenously, which is the most powerful and most addictive way to use it. A lot of smoking. Anyway, I'm getting into the weeds. The point is they figured out a method. And as I said before, the generals all hated this. Like all the generals are like, put them in the brig, give them court-martial. These guys are terrible soldiers. And again, Nixon, I love to hate this guy and I hate to love this guy. He's like, no court-martials, nobody's going in the brig, listen to Jaffe. It doesn't work perfectly. There's guys who come home and are heroin addicts. But it works pretty well. So there's public health. That's not the Nixon we expect. Now, unfortunately, marijuana goes differently. Again, good Nixon. You guys all know what a politician does when they don't really know what to do with something and it's a political problem and they wish it would just go away. Like, we will form a commission. We will get the brightest, most capable people, and they will figure out what we should do. And Nixon has one of these commissions. Ex-governor of Maryland is in charge of it. Nonpartisan, smart guy. And they come back with this report and they say like, marijuana is not that big a deal. It's way safer than alcoholic beverages. It's not good. You don't want children using this for God's sakes. Yeah, it's not a big problem. Okay, the United States government and some state governments have been doing these same reports for decades. So in 1943, they had like bohemians in New York City, right in the middle of the war, are like smoking weed, vipers they called them. And the mayor of the city of New York does one of these reports, they find the same thing. It's not really, it's annoying, but it's not that big a deal. So we do this every so often. By the way, this was much weaker marijuana. Again, I stress, the drugs aren't the same. This is much weaker, less THC marijuana than we would have today. It's not apples to apples today and then. All right. Should Nixon just say, oh, I see the wisdom of these blue ribbon folk, and now we will, I don't know, legalize it, decriminalize it? No. Because already by 1973, it's not, by the time this kind of comes to Nixon, he sees a political problem. America's parents are very anxious about young Jimmy and young Mary getting high in the basement. He doesn't throw federal resources toward the problem in the US, the demand side. But what he does instead, and this should ring a bell because it's, again, like what politicians do, go after the supply side. Don't arrest young Billy and Mary, although there are a lot of marijuana arrests in the 1970s of white, middle-class kids. Lots of arrests. Not so much prison time, but they spend a day or two in jail, and that's not much fun. Go after the supply. And so this is what you see. Nixon does one of those bait and switch things. He creates the Drug Enforcement Administration. Still around today. There used to be a thing called the Bureau of Narcotics. It's basically the same thing, but you give it a new name, and he threw more money at it. Go after bad guys, people nobody likes. And again, DA is not bad at what they do. They do interdict a fair amount. Famously, and this is one of those public health questions, what's the best way you could stop people from using illegal drugs if you had the tools to do it? I mean, this is horrible. This is like draconian monster idea. Don't tell the administration about this. You could poison the drug supply. Right? It's horrible. They smoke like, that'll stop them. Well, we kind of do that. We give the Mexican government, this was them, not us. But we pay the Mexican government to go into Mexico where almost all the marijuana that was sort of low grade was coming from. It's coming from Colombia, it's coming from other places, the low grade stuff. And they spray all that, because the crops are like visible, like hundreds of acres. They spray them with this poison, this herbicide. If you're a drug grower, you're like, crap, they just sprayed the poison on it. Hurry, harvest it. We can still sell it to the idiots up north. This is the origin, by the way, of the American marijuana industry, right? So some smart guys in Humboldt County, they're like, nobody wants that poison weed from Mexico. We can grow it better and stronger here in the US. And so it's, what do they call that problem? The whack-a-mole or the balloon. You squeeze the balloon, it gets, same problem, right? You got rid of the supply from Mexico, somewhat, it didn't work perfectly, and it explodes in the United States. So if there's demand, it's really hard to end supply, right? I want to get high, find me some product. We find it. So that's a failure. That doesn't work. Change the dynamic. So, and again, one of the other unfortunate consequences is a lot of the Mexican drug dealers, one, they go pro. So a lot of it was small farmers and folks like that. This causes those small farmers to lose their business, so it goes professional. And that's the origin of kind of organized drug narcotic rings in Mexico. And again, if you're a smart business person, you ever seen a big bale of marijuana? I know many of you have. Right, it's like super ungainly and huge and stinks to high heaven. And it's not even worth that much. Whereas cocaine, super easy to transport, doesn't smell. Right, so the business model changes because there's a supply side issue. And then, all right, here's what's really important to understand. It's so easy to look at the federal government. We look at it today for trying to understand policy direction, and it is important. But the laboratory of the states is trying to wrestle with these same problems, trying to understand what to do with this conundrum of huge drug demand in the United States, a lot of political confusion about what to do. One of the entrepreneurial kind of politicians in the United States, one of the pros, dreamed of being president forever. He never gets to be it, is Nelson Rockefeller, grandson of John D. Tons of money in this dude's pockets, wants to be president. He thinks maybe he can ride drug fears all the way to the White House. He'll get to the vice presidency, by the way, but he won't get to the presidency. If Nixon won't push hard enough, he'll try. Nixon had taken the nomination from him way back in 1960. Okay. The politics of drug control in which punishment features seems to work pretty well. Rockefeller, super smart guy, doesn't listen to anybody other than police, prosecutors, and folks who are dedicated to law enforcement. They say, like, Governor, you give us enough money, we can help solve the problem. And he pushes this issue. There's a lot of constituent support for this. A lot of people are upset. A lot of people are afraid. They're worried again about their children. They're worried about their communities. Right, this is not a good guy, bad guy thing. Like, this is a real problem. How do you solve it? No silver bullet answer. So this is the beginning of the change. It's not Nixon. It's sure as heck not going to be Ford or Carter. It's happening at the local level. The results are quite astonishing. If you give law enforcement the money and the incentives, in other words, this is how to get promoted, this is how to get resources, they know how to find people who are doing crime. It's not like the amount of people doing drugs increased dramatically during this period. But they're catching them now. They're putting efforts into it. This is the beginning of what people often call the carceral state, turning this simply into a question of punishment rather than public health. Now, not everyone's going to do this, but this is one answer. Poor Jimmy Carter, right, just passed away. He's like 1,005 years old. Did all sorts of good deeds the last 87 years of his life. As president, people kind of have mixed feelings. He doesn't get the highest ranking. He's the guy who looks at this problem. He's an engineer mind. And he's like, all right, we got a problem with demand. We have a lot of people across the board using drugs. Cannabis seems to be the biggie. Cocaine's not far behind. This is the late 70s. Is this really a problem? Right? Engineer mind. Is this a problem? And Carter's like, no. He brings in a lot of smart folks. They're like, no. Yeah, people abuse it, and it'll screw up some people's lives for sure. We don't want kids to get it. And he's got like guys like Willie Nelson. You know who Willie Nelson is? That's like a name. Like he's also like 1,005 years old. He still like plays. They prop him up in Austin, he plays. Knows like 10,000 songs and he knows them still. Keep playing music, folks. All right, so he brings in people who are like advocates. And there's a coalition. Can you see all that? A lot of verbiage down there. You're not supposed to do that with PowerPoint slides. There's kind of a growing coalition of people. Public health experts, users, people who know how government works, lobbyists, people who make a lot of money selling drugs, give money to this lobby. Tom Forcade, who's one of the biggest smugglers in the United States, not the best guy in the world to fund your organization. He gives a lot of the money to this normal group, National Organization to Reform Marijuana Laws. So you're right, we're in politics now. It's not just one-way street. I'm afraid, punish these bad guys. It's a war. So here's one of this. So historians, we love the word contingency. We're so boring, right? Social scientists are like, no, I have a formula. We'll solve this with a model. Done. Historians are like, well, it changed over time. Here's where the change is. He's pushing for Carter, national decriminalization of marijuana and talking about cocaine. Now, it's a long story. We won't get into it. You can see some states start to do it. This one's the first. I went to the University of Michigan in the late 70s, Ann Arbor in 1970. They had this thing called the hash bash. Do they have that here? I don't think so. We're in the quad, the big public area at the University of Michigan on, oh gosh, today, April 1st, April Fool's Day. They would have open smoking of hashish. Most people just had weed, and nobody got arrested. Nobody got a ticket, nothing. You could just do that. All right. So all I want to get across is like so much contingency in this war on drugs. If the story, if it's 1970, no, it's November 2nd, 1980, and I'm giving you this lecture, I'd be like, well, we sure solved that drug problem. But that's not what happened. Politics again, and not the worst sense of the word, in the best sense of the word in many ways. Remember Nelson Rockefeller? Ronald Reagan saw the same public. He saw a public that was fed up with children using marijuana. I mean, the famous story, and it's a true story, is in Washington, D.C. Maybe it's a suburb, Chevy Chase or something. I can't quite remember Chevy Chase. I'm getting the knot. Jacob knows more than me. Just ask him the questions later. What happens is mommy and daddy let Jimmy and Johnny have a birthday party, and they go, the kids are terrible. They made a huge mess. So they go in the backyard and start cleaning up with brooms. And it's like, what is this cigarette doing here? Oh my God, there's dozens of these little cigarettes. Wait, I don't think it's a cigarette, Jimmy. Right. They're freaked out. These are kids. And they start a national organization. Stop the decriminalization, the normalization of marijuana. So it's a political battle. And at this point, we might still think, well, okay, cuts both ways. It's not just conservative Republicans who see this. Politicians do the math, right? You win by one vote over 50, or depends if there's 3 or 4. Anyway, you get the point. You got to win the most votes. This is one of my favorite stories. This guy, he's running for Cook County District Attorney, State's Attorney. He's eventually going to be the mayor of Chicago. He's the son of the famous first Mayor Daley. He's looking for an issue. He has to win black voters to win the election. Cook County, anybody from Cook County? All right, my Chicago brother. I grew up in Chicago too. So in Chicago, you vote for Democrat. Otherwise, you get beat up. You have to vote Democrat. You never get your garbage taken away again if you don't vote Democrat. But Cook County has all these suburbs around it that are part of the county. They vote Republican. Same thing. You probably get beat up if you don't vote Republican. Nah. To win a county election, you need massive turnout in the city of Chicago. And that's how you win an election. Usually Republicans win these races. This Democrat turns to the black community And he says, I know you've been under-policed. I know you've got problems with heroin addiction. I know you've got problems with drug use. And he puts it in a whole package, and criminality and muggings and other things like that. He goes, nobody's paying attention to you. I will. I will put resources into your community and stop this behavior. He's a Democrat, more or less a liberal Democrat. Massive black turnout on this issue. Right? The politics of this is so confounding. It's not just Nixon, not just Reagan the conservative. Here's the liberal Democrat. It wins. I like that there's all white people behind him. He wouldn't have won without black voters. He's really not, yeah, okay. In the 1980s, we turn away from trying to figure out methods of allaying some A word that doesn't put people who use drugs in prison. We start to turn away from that. Some good things that happen is, and there really is a problem with kids using cannabis in particular. We started an education movement. There'd been really no resources put toward this until that time. But the bad side is they don't bring in like people who know, like, how do you help a 12-year-old with moral judgment questions or value? They bring in a cop, your cop, the LA chief of police, who comes up with a bright idea. It's like there's been huge animosity between the Los Angeles Police Department and many of the communities it polices. And this guy, he's trying to solve it by not actually addressing the real problem. He's like, we'll put a cop in every school, and that cop will talk to kids about why they shouldn't use drugs. Okay, that's a good idea. But the cops are like cops, right? They're like, yeah, don't use drugs. They're bad. I'll arrest you. Okay, we've done like so is DARE still around? Any of you do DARE? It's basically gone, isn't it? Okay, maybe one person thought they might. It just didn't work. You know, you could do this good social science studies like kids who didn't take DARE, kids who did, and the drug results were exactly the same. No expertise. It was a placebo effect, maybe a tiny bit, but not much. Famously, Nancy Reagan had a Just Say No campaign where she, again, just like when someone offers you drugs, just say no. Okay, here's what's funny about that one. It worked some. Isn't that weird? So Daryl Gates' thing doesn't really work. But Nancy Reagan getting up there, and she would go around schools, and they were public messages, and they'd put it on cartoons and things like that. Kids are like, she says, just say no, I say no. We actually can measure it. She had some impact. Silly Nancy Reagan with her just say no. It's like, huh, okay. Who would have thunk? But it's like, the famous stop clock is right twice a day. Okay. Sort of luck. All right, where am I at? I don't have time. I need to go faster, maybe? Okay, phase 2. So one of the weird things about drugs, you all are living it, so you know this. Drug usage changes over time. The drug of choice changes over time. You know, we've had the fentanyl crisis now for years. Started with an opioid crisis, when you guys were little kids. So in the 1980s, one of the things that happened is cocaine's a super popular drug. Remember, it's easy to get over the borders. It's easy to hide and distribute, but it's still expensive. It costs a lot of money to get high-end powder cocaine. So again, you got some bright guys in the underworld, part of the deviant globalization crowd, who say to themselves, there must be a better way to catch a mouse. And so they invent this product called crack cocaine, which is super easy. You need like kitchen chemistry. We could make it right now if we wanted, if somebody has a pocket of cocaine. You just take some powder cocaine, you throw some baking soda in it, you pour a pile of water on it, you heat it up, you boil the product, you boil it down, and it forms this crystalline substance which you can smoke. Right? And we all know that anything you can smoke gets to your brain way better than it has to go through your nasal passages, and mucus gets on it, doesn't work as well. It hits way harder, way quicker, And it's cheap. $5, you can sell crack. So again, that demand problem, smart suppliers will figure out how to do it. This is a real problem. It becomes, in certain communities, epidemic, only certain communities. And you see our fellows up there, a mixed crowd of folks trying to figure out what to do about it. And again, who do you talk to try to solve the problem? This is what we started with this, right? Public health or punitive. These are congressmen. Who do they know? They don't know a bunch of doctors. But, you know, their buddies are the police chiefs. Their buddies are judges who they got appointed. Their buddies are district attorneys or state's attorneys. They know these guys. That's who they are. So the weirdest thing is Michael Fortner here, political scientist. He's writing about this. He knows way more about this than me. So they have all these hearings. And the weirdest thing is also a select committee. So again, how does democracy really work? You know what select committees are? They're like, you get a couple representatives who are pissed about something. And they like have some oomph and some power. They're like, I want to investigate this. And they create these weird things called, they can't legislate, but they can hold hearings. And they can focus attention. And Charlie Rangel, that guy on the left, the black guy who represents Harlem, he's got a lot of oomph. He gets a select committee on this. He's the guy who pushed for heroin reduction in New York City long before this. That's who they listen to. Police chiefs. Yeah, the proverbial carpenter and the nail thing, right? These guys know how to do one thing. Many of them know how to do it really well. Put people in prison. That's what they're good at. So the answers they come up with are not public health, they're not rehabilitation, they're not education, they're incarceration. Oops. Oop, that was the drugs. That's that crack cocaine. So in 1986, they passed this massively punitive law. It kind of goes down in the annals of US legislative mistakes. It creates huge disparities between people arrested for powder cocaine, a business dominated by whites and Latinos, to a crack cocaine business dominated by Black Americans and some Latinos, foreigners, Colombians, and people like that. Huge disparity in sentencing. The stuff is the same. I mean, crack has more baking powder in it than powder traditionally does. It's the same stuff. And yet the penalties are 100 to 1 different. And I'm talking punishment. Years in prison are massively different. Some of this is public concerns. This happens at the same time that a really famous basketball player, any of you guys from the era know, some people said Len Bias would have been the next Michael Jordan or Magic Johnson. And he dies, and it's not easy to do. He dies of a cocaine overdose. I don't even want to think how much cocaine he snorted for this to happen. But he dies, and it's tragic, and it's horrible. And this is a guy, right? You couldn't be more fit. You couldn't be stronger. And he dies. So this freaks people out. Also, can you do the math on 1986? Every member of the House of Representatives is up for re-election in just a little bit of time. A third of the Senate is up for re-election at any minute. So the politics of this are so powerful. All right, I'm getting toward the end, and we'll do a little bit on opioids. So here's one of the interesting things, and this goes, I don't like to do contemporary stuff, but this has a nice echo to contemporary stuff. So in the United States, since the progressive era, the early 20th century, accelerated in the 1930s in the New Deal, way accelerated in the 1960s in the Great Society years, we've created this kind of administrative state to try to bring expertise to problems. Food and Drug Administration, they should be dealing with this. There's all sorts of people focused on this stuff. They haven't had a great record when it comes to most drugs. This one group, though, which is actually in the judiciary, is called the Sentencing Commission. It's created by Congress to try to cover up their mistakes. So Congress gets excitable and they create long prison sentences for something, or there's tremendous differences in how judges are responding to the same exact felony crimes. This group called the Sentencing Commission's job is to be like, Mr. Senator on the Judiciary Committee, you guys screwed up again. Here's a report that shows how to fix the problem. It doesn't have to be political. We'll just, it's just the sentencing commission. Again, really smart people, a lot of ex-judges, people like that on it. They're like, the minute this law passes in 1986, they're like, oh my God, you guys screwed up so bad. This makes no sense, what you've done with crack cocaine. It doesn't work. Every about 3 years, they tell them again, you guys screwed up, you have to fix this. The politics are too strong. You can never lose an election in the United States by being too strong on crime. Right? Maybe a few districts, but in general, no. All right. So this is incarceration. You all kind of know this. These are drug-driven numbers. The number of people going to prison through federal, state, and local, because the federal government is supplying lots of money to states and localities to beef up enforcement, to create more courts, more court capacity. My sister's first job as a lawyer was she worked on the night courts in Cook County, in which it was all drug crimes. They didn't have the capacity, so they would just ignore them. Like, we got murders here, man. We can't deal with some guy who had like 5 grams of crack cocaine. Now they have the capacity because the feds pay for it. Local law, Illinois law, but the feds pay for it. Okay, more of the same. So this is the tragic part. This is the major screw-up part. Okay, what is that thing about you do the same thing over and over, right? So people start to understand they've screwed up. A lot of interest groups, community groups, reform politicians, public health officials, coalitions grow, and they try to remedy this problem. We're getting close to now, in a sense. California, right? There's always 2 rules of politics. If you want to get people's attention and you want to get as much support as possible, it's for the children. It's for the children. I'm for children. So that's like one. The other thing is like, it's medical. It'll keep us healthier. We won't die, right? Children in death. So this is a brilliant move and a real one to start treating cannabis not as the worst drug in the world, but it's something that has medical utility. This is now caught on immensely since it started here in California. That's a lot of words. You don't need to read them all. All right, you all kind of know this. This is the proverbial historian approach. Not that doing what I just showed you right here, making cannabis, more or less legal in many, many states, doesn't come without its own problems, right? This is not a silver bullet either. Drug abuse, children using it, extraordinarily powerful. We've got a new wave of public health problems now. Maybe not as bad as the old. The other one I like, and this is another kind of California thing, we're coming closer and closer to using psychedelics as medically useful substances. So like LSD, psilocybin, mushrooms, that there's utility in these. For a long time, you couldn't legally, there would be some exceptions, you couldn't legally experiment with this if you were a bona fide scientist. Now it's gotten a little looser. Elon Musk, right? A little LSD doesn't hurt anyone. Microdosing has become popular in certain circles. We're at the moment where this is probably going to be next. So the war on drugs starts to really end in the early 21st century, and incrementally we're providing alternatives. This has gummed up the works. And I won't do much on this. I'm a historian. I'm not a contemporary drug behavioral therapist. But this was a different problem, and I just want to really end with it because it's so useful to understand. I have not talked much here about so-called white market drugs, right? We've been focusing on black market drugs, illegal drugs. More people in the United States historically, including today, have drug abuse problems through so-called white market drugs, barbiturates, amphetamines. Anybody in this room ever done Adderall? Right? These are doctor-prescribed drugs. They're relatively easy to abuse, and you can die from them. but they're white market drugs. They're legal, they're prescribed, they're incredibly lucrative for pharmaceutical companies. I'm not saying they're bad. Most of the people that use these drugs, well, some large percent, they genuinely need them. The same thing goes with opioids. Opioids were an attempt to answer a really hard problem. It's hard for 18 and 20-year-olds to imagine it, but a lot of people, as they age especially, face chronic pain, really bad pain that surgery doesn't fix, and they need pain relief. That's where Big Pharma started with creating a variety of opioids that they thought could help with chronic pain. But man, and I say this as a pro-capitalist in every sense of the word, it's so hard to resist profit maximization when you have a product that so many people want and will pay for, whether they medically need it or not. And Big Pharma, not all of it, sort of falls prey to the immense profitability of this white market drug that occurs. So we're still trying to figure out that one. So, what do we do with that? One of the things I found fascinating, other than the fentanyl crisis, is President Trump has more or less ignored the issue of drugs, other than, supply side, we'd have more interdiction of fentanyl. Just fentanyl. You ever heard him mention cocaine? We don't grow it here in the United States. So it's interesting, the rhetoric around these issues has changed dramatically over the last few years. I would say 25 years already at this point. The war on drugs is over, but we haven't solved by any means the problem of drug abuse, which is massive in the United States. I got nothing in the way of answers to how we fix it. Maybe some stray thoughts. But all I'm trying to get a hold of here is that this is one of those problems that a democratic society has a hard time managing because we are prone to aggregate things. Marijuana and heroin. In 1970, the Drug Reform Act put both of them as Schedule I most dangerous drugs. Ludicrous. Makes no sense. Amphetamines and barbiturates, readily available through prescription with little regulation. That's that kind of capture thing where the regulators and the companies are a little too close. What you probably need to fix these problems is a pretty big wallet that will pay for people who have abuse problems and get them into rehabilitation, which works really badly. That's the bad news. Most people won't willingly go into rehab and don't successfully complete rehab or immediately return to drug use after rehab. Sometimes people have to go 2, 3, 5 times before they want to change. So yeah, that's why it's so much money. It's so expensive because its failure rate is so high. Cannabis, we just pretend is okay now, right? Oh yeah, it was a mistake, sorry. We don't know what to do with the drugs of choice for many young people right now. No silver bullet, no easy answers. Like any good public policy problem, we're going to wrestle with this as long as you all are alive, is my guess. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Farber, for your very engaging and informative talk. We are now going to move on to the Q&A portion of the evening. So we invite you to come up to the microphone with your question, say your first and last name, your school, your year, and your major. And as tempting as it is to share all the context for your question, we ask that you please keep it brief so we can get to as many questions as possible. If somebody is already up here at the microphone, we invite you to line up on the side. Thank you.
Yes, it's you.
Well, hello, my name is Athena. I'm a junior studying politics, philosophy, and economics at CMC. Truly inspiring talk, a lot of history. I learned a lot. And I think what I'm wondering is I think there are other countries who are troubled by similar substance abuse problems in their past. One thing that was just like kind of lingering in my mind, like why is this such an American problem? Like, what makes drug and war on drugs so uniquely difficult to the US? And is there any successful models that we can, follow to tackle similar problems?
So the US is different in one way to start with, which is we did choose a far more punitive model than most of our analogous countries, at least European countries, for sure. But that's true in general in terms of how we treat criminality. So yeah, we were far more punitive. We remain far more punitive than most of our near nation states. Asia is more complicated. So that's one piece of it. We are more punitive. The other piece is really a weird, hard one to get at. So the example most people probably who know anything about this are thinking of is maybe Portugal. So Portugal was the first country in Europe that tried to decriminalize the use of all drugs. And they had and still have a major opioid, particularly heroin problem in that country. So they went sort of full public health. And they spent a ton of money trying to kind of lure people into rehabilitation. They also spent a lot of money on social services. And Portugal is not a rich country, so it's not easy for them to make these kinds of decisions. It worked pretty well in a couple ways. One, people didn't go to prison. They were far less likely to overdose because the drugs were carefully regulated. But it didn't work in that these people did stay isolated from society. So, it's a mixed bag. I stress expensive because in the last few years, Portugal has decided that this, was a misuse of their limited federal funds, their limited government funds, and have dramatically cut back on support services for addicts. The result's been what you might expect. If addicts don't get enough support, they tend to do some bad things, rob people, do crime, things like that. So that's as close as we have, sort of that kind of work. But a lot of European countries, the Netherlands has a very different regime than we do. Okay, so why don't we just do that? Why don't we just do what those Europeans do? Now we're into like American studies, sociology, the humanities stuff. So we're a far more atomized, chaotic country than most European countries historically have been, far more heterogeneous, far less trusting of one another. You can do surveys, at least for about 70 years, that show that we don't trust each other as much. We don't trust our institutions as much. We're a liberty-loving people, right? So we have had a long tradition of atomized behavior, anomic behavior. There were far more murders in the early 20th century in New York and Chicago than there were in any European capital. Just way more. So how do you explain that? So I'm kind of going with the atomized, liberty-loving, chaotic. We move a lot. We don't have kinship structures that are strong here the way they are in many other countries. We don't look after parents the same way other people do, right? And there's all these kind of behavioral differences. It's changing, depends who the population is. As we become a different demographics, maybe some of these will flip. As Europe has a very different demographic, some of those might flip. That's something people have. When they say Portugal, that's usually the response you get, especially from people who don't want to spend a lot of money. It's like, we're not Portugal, dude. They have strong families. They look after their addicts. They're welcome in their homes despite them stealing, mom's jewelry. It's different there. I don't know. That's me being a real rough and ready social scientist, not a hard-nosed empiricist. But that's what I got.
Thank you.
Good evening, Professor. I hated your talk. April Fools. My name is Eli. I am a sophomore studying philosophy and public affairs from the great state of Illinois. And my question is that throughout your talk, you talked about how large swaths of the black community were politically in support of many policies of the war on drugs. But you also talked about how, and we've seen since, the war on drugs led to a whole lot more black incarceration in the United States. My question is, how do you and historians explain this political support given this large increase in incarceration in the black community? Thank you.
Turn it over to you. That's a tough one. Better he should answer it. A simple answer is people, it doesn't really matter who they are, want fair, comprehensive policing of dangerous elements in their community. Right? That's like a consensus. That's like common sense. And since black communities suffered from under-policing and under-enforcement of crime of all kinds, they were pissed. They wanted more support. They wanted more safety. And they's a weird word to use. You know, the community is disparate. So church-going folks, respectable folks, yeah, they were like, this guy just stole my purse. That can't happen. But they didn't necessarily want over-policing. So that's what they got. Eventually, they got over-policing. And, you know, I know the Chicago case study the best, and Chicago's police, you know, this is a word that gets tossed around a lot too casually, but they were racist, you know, forthrightly in the 80s and 90s. And they mistreated the black community when they over-policed it. So, you know, once you see like the results, you're like, oh, I didn't mean that. So that's a piece of the story.
Yeah, so I'm Evan. I'm a junior majoring in government at CMC, and my question's similar to Eli's. The enforcement of drug laws in the United States is incredibly racist. Drug use between white and black Americans is roughly equal, yet black Americans are 3 times more likely to be incarcerated for it. And my question is, like, in your talk, it seemed like the war on drugs had unintended bad consequences, and that the people who were the architects of the war on drugs had good intentions. Do you view the racist enforcement of drug laws as an unintended byproduct of those decisions, or rather like people making bad decisions with malintent?
Yeah, good question. So first I want to back off on your first claim. It is true that proportionately black and white people use drugs at roughly the same rate. So the mixture of drugs varies over time. You know, which drugs you're talking about. Cannabis, it's basically the same. But drug sellers are not proportionately the same. So it is worth at least recognizing
No, they're
that unfortunate
white,
fact.
right? They're disproportionately white.
Sellers of heroin and cocaine, crack cocaine in particular, were disproportionately black. Cocaine was disproportionately Latinos of one kind or another. So there's a little apples and oranges process here. But I'll go to the core point, which is about, is this a racist predilection by police? I think what police learned, once they were given kind of free hand to arrest people and actually expect them to get incarcerated, was that this was a marvelous way to police poor people. That's what the cops learned. They'd had a really hard time deciding what, if anything, they would do when it came to policing poor people. Most of them couldn't care less. You know, again, they left poor people alone in a destructive way. So when they could figure out that this was a way to police, you know, you could go up to somebody in New York City, for example, and pat them down and find, oh, they have 2 joints in their pocket. And they could pick who they wanted to pat down. That's when you get a huge racialization. In the 1970s, more white people proportionately were arrested for drug crimes than black or Latino people. It was marijuana arrests. That goes away when we decriminalize marijuana. So yes, there's a racist element and there's a racist purpose in some places, but I'm not willing to go all the way with you on that supposition.
Thank you.
Hi there. I'll be honest, I was going to ask about kind of the race question too, but I think that got pretty well covered. So I want to ask really about the transition from heroin, which is of course still used at, you know, unacceptably high rates in America today, but more of a transition from that to, like you said, so-called white drugs, drugs that are actually given by prescription. When and why did that shift occur? And do you, I mean, of course, you're not really in the business of foreseeing, but do you foresee fentanyl kind of having a similar drop off down the line based on kind of the historical evidence with heroin, or is it a completely different situation we're facing today?
So one of the strangest things when it comes to drug abuse is that for most of the history of the United States, white people were more likely to abuse drugs than anyone else. And it's because they were legal or they cost money at an open market and they had greater access to medical health. So those opioid addicts in 1890 to 1915, they were able to go to a doctor and get a prescription. Most black people remember how horrific things were, didn't have that access. Cocaine was the same for a while. So what does transition is, as you say, the market structures of these different drugs. And the same was true with the opioid epidemic. You guys, this is now, in our memories. So opioid addiction was overwhelmingly, painkillers is what I'm talking about, was overwhelmingly a white problem, a white rural problem. It's not true anymore. So opioid addiction overwhelmingly now has turned back to being a problem, mostly of Black Americans, but also Latinos, way disproportionately. And that's because it's no longer a prescribed drug. It's now in the so-called black market drug. And so access has changed, the market structure has changed. Fentanyl, Donald Trump's actually right, that fentanyl is super scary. And you find your weed particularly powerful, there could be a reason. Fentanyl is really dangerous, and it kills people. So that's going to be a real interesting one to tackle. Stopping the supply is what we're trying to do now, and we all know, supply side stuff is really hard to do, especially with fentanyl, right? I talked about cocaine, right? I could stick it in this device, fentanyl, and we'd all have enough to die. So it's a hard problem to solve, other than one thing I didn't talk about in here is drugs tend to be cyclical because your mom or your dad is addicted to a drug, you see what it does to them. There's a real good likelihood that you don't want to do the same thing as them. Your brother dies, you don't want to use that drug. That's basically what happens with the crack cocaine problem. People saw what it did to people and they're like, I don't want to be like that. The word crackhead basically came out of the black community, right? They mocked these poor schlubs on the corner. So maybe opioids will go through the same process. Like you say, I look backward.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, Professor, thank you for your talk today. My name is Charlie Hatcher. I'm a senior here at CMC. I was wondering about what you think is behind the dramatic increase in Americans using drugs decades ago in the 50s, 60s, and 70s that you talked about at the start. Do you think there's more to this story than pure social contagion? And if so, what changes in American culture do you think help explain that increase?
Yeah, another one we've never come to a consensus on answering that question. So I would attribute the large-scale decision by young Americans, and that's what we're really talking about here, which is different than a lot of drug takers, was a real distrust in the cultural authorities that they'd been raised to believe in. Whether it's folks like us, university faculty and administrators, pastors and ministers, rabbis, the civil rights movement sort of exposed a horrifically ugly side to what most white Americans did their very best to ignore, and suddenly they couldn't. It's not like white people woke up every day and felt how can I oppress black people? Most communities, they never saw a black person because of segregation. So the Vietnam War, some people would make the case that university students going to a place like UCal Berkeley, right? You all kind of know that story where suddenly they've got their little computer card. It's so cute, to look back all those days, little punch card. And suddenly it's I'm not a machine, I'm a person. So there's a kind of discrediting of cultural authority, and I think it opened the door to expansion of how we get high. The medicine chest got bigger. But also the other part that I got no proof for this, there was a massive intake, I sort of mentioned this, of barbiturates and amphetamines after World War II. So mommy and daddy were getting high. You know, it was prescribed, it was legal. They were getting high. And kids are not blind. Mommy's sort of dopey today. No wonder she doesn't care anymore if I scream and cry all the time. So that combination maybe opened the door.
Thank you.
The thought. Well, thank you all. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.